Scream.
A young woman stopped at a remote convenience store to pick up a few supplies. What she didn't know was that two men were already watching her from a distance. Jason and John were local drifters who spent their days roaming the area in search of victims, and once a woman caught their attention, she rarely escaped unharmed. That weekend, Em had traveled deep into the mountains with her parents and younger brother for a family getaway. The four of them were enjoying every moment together, excited for what they thought would be a peaceful vacation. None of them had any idea that a nightmare was about to begin. After stocking up on supplies, Em's parents took her little brother to visit a nearby waterfall. Em wasn't interested in hiking, so she decided to stay behind and wait by the campsite. Not long after they left, she heard something behind her. She called out twice, but no one answered. At first, she brushed it off as her imagination, but moments later, she heard it again. The forest was completely silent, yet that silence only made her more uneasy. A growing sense of dread settled in her chest. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, Em decided it was time to leave, but the more nervous she became, the more she felt like someone was following her. Fortunately, she managed to make it back to her family's vehicle without incident. She quickly locked every door. For a moment, she thought she was safe. She had no idea she had just trapped herself inside. Some time passed, and Em eventually drifted off to sleep in the driver's seat. She never noticed a white Jeep pulling up behind her. Outside the window, a man stood staring at her. His eyes never left her. A few moments later, Jason joined him. The two men had already set their sights on the young woman. Out here in the middle of nowhere, they saw the perfect opportunity. When John noticed a glimpse of Em's red bra beneath her shirt, a disturbing idea crossed his mind. Jason immediately understood what his partner was thinking. He decided to leave for a while and keep watch nearby. As soon as Jason was gone, John moved toward the vehicle. He began trying to force the door open. The faint sound of the handle rattling woke Em from her sleep. The moment she saw the stranger outside her window, terror surged through her body. She immediately shouted for him to stay away from her car, but instead of backing off, John seemed even more excited. Her fear only encouraged him. A twisted grin spread across his face. Panicking, Em repeatedly slammed her hand against the horn. The piercing sound echoed through the otherwise silent wilderness. She hoped her parents would hear it and come running. Meanwhile, her father heard the horn in the distance and instantly sensed that something was wrong. He quickly handed his young son over to his wife and rushed back toward the parking area. The relentless horn blasts finally pushed John over the edge. His playful expression vanished. Enraged, he began pounding on the windows. Through the glass, he hurled threats and demands at Em. He wanted her out of the vehicle. Then things got even worse. The noise attracted Jason back to the scene, and unlike John, Jason was far more dangerous. Without hesitation, he pulled out a shotgun and ordered Em to get out. Facing the barrel of a gun, she had no choice. Trembling with fear, she slowly opened the door and stepped outside.
Dad!
Meanwhile, Em's mother grew worried when neither her husband nor daughter returned. Fearing the worst, she left her young son inside the tent and ran toward the parking area. Trying to distract the attackers, she screamed for Em to run. Em had barely taken 2 steps when a gunshot shattered the air. Jason raised the shotgun and issued a chilling warning. If Em took another step, her parents would die. To keep them alive, she had no choice but to surrender. What she didn't know was that something far worse was waiting ahead. The nightmare was only beginning. The family was soon forced deep into the forest. After tormenting the mother and daughter, the two men still weren't satisfied. Instead, their cruelty only escalated. Jason placed a soda can on top of the father's head. Then he walked several yards away and raised his shotgun. Terror completely broke the man. His body shook uncontrollably. The can kept falling from his head. After several failed attempts, Jason lost his patience. In a burst of rage, he pulled the trigger. The father collapsed to the ground. Watching him die shattered the mother. Her screams echoed through the wilderness, but neither man showed the slightest hint of remorse. Next, they placed the can on her head. Overwhelmed by grief, she fought back desperately. The response was immediate. One brutal punch knocked her unconscious. Jason's aim was terrible. His first shots missed completely.
Set it up.
Frustrated, he abandoned the game altogether. This time, he aimed directly at her. Another gunshot rang out. The mother never got back up. Finally, believing they had eliminated every witness, the two men turned their attention to him. Moments later, she too was gone. Thinking their crimes were finally buried, the killers prepared to leave. But while looking through his phone, John made a shocking discovery. There was another child, a young boy. The family's youngest son was still alive. Determined to leave no loose ends behind, the two men immediately turned around and headed back toward the campsite. When the two criminals burst into the tent, they were shocked to find it completely empty. The little boy was nowhere to be seen. After waking up and realizing his family was gone, he had wandered out of the tent alone, stumbling through the dense forest in search of his parents. Just as despair began to overwhelm him, he spotted a figure moving between the trees ahead. Hope instantly ignited inside him, believing he had finally found someone who could help. He used the last of his strength to run toward the stranger, but Vicky had no idea that a frightened little boy was following behind her. Focused on her task, she continued making her way back toward her boyfriend, Ian. At that moment, Ian was changing a flat tire. The couple had planned a camping trip, but their vehicle had suffered a blowout on the way. While returning to grab some tools, Vicky finally noticed the unconscious child lying nearby. Fortunately, Ian was a doctor. He immediately rushed over and carefully examined the boy. After checking him over, he determined that the child had simply collapsed from exhaustion. There were no life-threatening injuries. Still, finding a lone child in the middle of a remote wilderness left both of them deeply concerned. Unable to ignore the situation, they split up and searched the surrounding forests, hoping to find the boy's family. But after hours of searching, they couldn't find a single trace of anyone. Looking at the child who remained unconscious, they desperately wanted to get him to a hospital. Unfortunately, their vehicle was disabled. Worse still, there was no cell phone signal anywhere in the mountains. They were completely cut off from help. Just as the couple found themselves trapped with no good options left, a vehicle suddenly appeared on the mountain road. Relieved, they waved it down and hurried over for assistance. What they never could have imagined was that the man behind the wheel was one of the killers responsible for slaughtering the boy's family. When John learned they had found a lost child, he quickly walked over to take a look. The moment he saw the boy, he recognized him immediately. This was the child he and Jason had been searching for. Determined to cover up the truth, John instantly began spinning lies. He claimed he had seen the family entering the mountains the day before. According to his story, they had probably been attacked by wild animals and tragically killed. Then he offered to help search for the missing family, pretending to be a concerned local. After discussing the situation, they decided that Vicky would stay behind and watch over the unconscious boy. Meanwhile, Ian followed John into the mountains, completely unaware that he was walking straight into a trap. Not long after they disappeared into the forest, the second criminal, Jason, arrived at the scene. Vicky remained completely unsuspecting. She assumed he was simply another local resident. She had no idea that deadly danger was rapidly approaching. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, John deliberately led Ian to the site of the previous day's massacre. What greeted him was the horrifying sight of the murdered family lying in pools of blood. Acting on instinct, Ian rushed forward to check for signs of life. After a thorough examination, he made a shocking discovery. The boy's mother was still breathing. The faintest spark of life remained. Without hesitation, Ian reached for his medical supplies and prepared to administer emergency treatment.
What are you doing?
At the same time, Vicky suddenly realized something was terribly wrong. Grabbing the little boy, she sprinted into the dark forest as fast as she could, watching his prey escape. And after suffering a painful cut to his arm during the struggle, Jason flew into a rage. He immediately released his hunting dog and ordered it to track Vicky down. Meanwhile, the sudden turn of events sent Ian into a panic. He violently shoved John aside and bolted into the dense forest. By the time John recovered and fired his rifle, Ian had already vanished among the trees. As the hunting dog chased after Vicky, it stumbled across the carcass of a dead wild boar. Instantly distracted by the food, the animal abandoned the pursuit and began devouring the carcass. Left without his dog, Jason was forced to continue the hunt alone. What he didn't realize was that Ian was also hiding somewhere within the same forest, as John carefully scanned the woods with his rifle, searching for any sign of Ian. A faint rustling sound suddenly came from nearby. Without a second thought, he raised his weapon and fired. The shot rang through the forest, but when he approached to inspect his target, he froze in disbelief. The person he had shot was none other than his own partner, Jason. In a twist nobody could have predicted, the ruthless killer met his end at the hands of his own accomplice. But at that exact moment, the frightened little boy in Vicky's arms suddenly burst into tears. The sharp cry echoed through the forest, and in an instant, it revealed Vicky's hiding place. The moment John heard the sound, he spun around and charged toward it at full speed.
I keep quiet.
Give me the fucking key.
No, 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 no.
Let him go!
At that moment, Vicky's screams finally reached Ian's ears. The instant he spotted the rifle in John's hands, Ian dropped flat into the tall grass. Peeking through the brush, he saw Vicky being held captive by John. The sight filled him with rage, but Ian knew he was no match for an armed killer. With nothing but his bare hands, he didn't stand a chance to stay alive. He forced himself to remain hidden and silent. Moments later, John tied Vicky's hands and suspended her from a tree. He roughly tore open part of her clothing, then picked up his shotgun. Slowly, he traced the barrel across her body. Vicky's face turned pale with fear. Tears filled her eyes as she begged him to stop. But John's real goal wasn't Vicky. He wanted her to scream. He wanted Ian to reveal himself. Yet despite her terror, Vicky refused to make a sound. Then suddenly, the roar of a vehicle engine echoed from below the mountain. Ian had realized he could never defeat John alone. His only option was to escape and find the police. The sound enraged John, forced to abandon his plans. He cut Vicky down from the tree and dragged her through the forest. He had to stop Ian before he reached help. The two soon arrived at a vehicle. John shoved Vicky inside and slammed his foot on the accelerator. The truck raced down the mountain in pursuit of Ian, knowing exactly what would happen if John caught him. Vicky waited for the perfect moment. As John focused on the road and let down his guard, she suddenly grabbed the steering wheel and yanked it hard. Meanwhile, Ian finally reached the nearest police station. After hearing his story, officers immediately mobilized and headed toward the forest with Ian leading the way. Back at the crash site, Vicky slowly regained consciousness. Every inch of her body ached as she struggled to her feet. But when she looked around, John was nowhere to be seen. Then she heard at the distant wail of police sirens. Hope instantly surged through her. For the first time, she believed she might actually be safe.
Let's foul as you. Okay. Stay in the car. Just stay there.
What she didn't know was that John had anticipated Ian would return with law enforcement. He had already prepared an ambush deep in the woods. Ian watched in horror as officers were gunned down. He tried to flee, but John fired a shot that struck him squarely in the shoulder. What John didn't realize was that the violent crash had loosened the ropes binding Vicky. While his attention remained fixed on Ian, she quietly pushed open the vehicle door and bolted back into the forest. The escape sent John into a fury. He immediately aimed his rifle at the wounded Ian and shouted into the woods. If Vicky didn't come out, Ian would die. Kind-hearted to the very end, Vicky couldn't bear the thought of watching Ian get killed because of her. To save him, she stepped out of hiding, but John wasn't ready to kill them yet. The crash had severely injured his leg, making it difficult for him to move. He needed Vicky alive. He needed someone to drive him away from the scene before more police arrived. Pressing the cold barrel of the gun against her, he ordered her to take him somewhere safe. What John didn't realize was that the terrified woman he had hunted all day was gone. After everything she had endured, Vicky was no longer a helpless victim. On the surface, she appeared calm and obedient as she got behind the wheel, but deep down, she was already planning her final counterattack.
Fucking do it! Oh, yeah!
Afterward, both Vicky and Ian were taken to the hospital. Fortunately, Ian's gunshot wound was not life-threatening, and he recovered while receiving treatment in a nearby room. As they reflected on the nightmare they had survived, they felt both grateful and shaken. The ordeal taught them a painful lesson. When danger strikes without warning, staying calm and thinking clearly can make all the difference. After surviving such a terrifying fight for their lives, neither of them would ever again underestimate the risks hidden in the wilderness. And with that, their harrowing struggle for survival finally came to an end.